What is up, everyone? It is Chewburger84 from the Alternerd Reality Network, and we are back with some Marvel Strike Force content. Now, we had a request from one of our Patreon subscribers over on the Masters of Launch Discord page who wanted me to revisit Blitz. So, coming up very soon, we know we've got a Colossus Blitz. There's probably one more X-Man at least that's going to need you to be able to perform pretty decently at a high level in Blitz if you want to unlock and at least have some of these characters usable without the requirement to spend money. Now, obviously, if you are spending, you don't want to spend money that you don't have to, so running a lot of Blitz gets you these new characters when they come out. So, given that we're on a Blitz and Chill day for me with the Ronal Blitz that's currently on, I thought that I would do this request for Ixen, so thank you very much for the question, pal. So what we're going to do is we're going to run through my particular save squads. Now, some of these teams are random. Some of these teams I've actually shifted around a little bit, so I actually pop people in and out as necessary. And I'll talk about decisions and how some of these characters work as we go through. Now, the age-old thing when it comes to Blitz is trying to keep characters at a similar CP level. That was always the dream in a pre-Red Star world. Now, unfortunately, Red Star's changed that because you can have a perfectly balanced CP squad, and then out of nowhere, someone gets a 5 or a 6 Red Stars, and then it is all over, sunshine. So what we're going to do is go through which teams and which characters don't necessarily need synergy or who can perform in kind of a randomized way. Which of these teams could probably be split up into smaller teams. So let's go through one by one what I have here, and I'll talk about which ones do quite well in regards to tier 8.3 in Blitz, which of these teams are sure to win, which of these teams are, let's say not going to perform so hot from time to time. So let's go through one by one. So Shield with Operative, it's been my go-to team since forever. Some people use Trooper in this slot. I'm not a big fan of it because there's a lot of teams that it gets you stuck. So if you come up against a Luke Cage, if you come up against a Thanos, if you come up against a Drax, anything that taunts and has a high resistance, you are going to get stuck because the minions that Nick Fury summons are normally going to die so quickly, or their resistance is, or their focus is so low, you're not going to be able to punch out those dispels that you need. So the Operative has always been my preferred setup in this team, and Trooper can come in quite handy in some randomized squads. I mean, get some decent Red Stars on that guy. He is always going to punch up above his weight. So this team is pretty much guaranteed to win. Who to avoid? In Blitz, if you're going up against a Spider-Verse team, they can struggle, but to be honest, when you're on offense, normally Shield can blow Spider-Verse to pieces. Brotherhood is really one of the only teams that gives these guys trouble, and the occasional Ultron team as well. Although with the right strategy, you can defeat an Ultron team, as long as it's not a hybrid Ultron and Brotherhood. Okay, so Shield, great all-round team. I recommend the Operative version. Unless you've just got Red Stars like a 6 or a 7 on the Trooper, then maybe. Don't swap out the Assault. It's just not going to work. If you do come up against the Brotherhood and you don't have the option to switch to anyone else, grab a Jessica Jones and sub her in for our Operative. What she can do is basically rip off all of the blinds and bleeds that come onto this team and allows Fury and buddies to heal back up, get rid of some of those disrupted, and then you can carry on as normal, albeit a little bit slower. The Jessica Jones also comes in handy because you can punch down a Juggernaut, so it works out okay. Alright, next one down, we have my Brotherhood team. Now, you probably noticed that my Brotherhood team is a little bit different to a lot of others. Whether I had the 6 Red Stars on this Venom or not, I would still use him as my 5th. Now, whether or not you use Mystique or Sabretooth is going to really depend on A, who you're coming up against, and B, where your Sabretooth or Mystique are at. Mystique doesn't necessarily need a lot of gear or Red Stars to do her job. She performs very, very well at a lower Red Star level. Sabretooth, on the other hand, needs quite a few Red Stars and gear before he starts to shine. He does a little bit better with a T4 in him, but I personally think that with so many other T4s being much better, it's a bit of a waste. So some of you might be asking, why Venom and not a full Brotherhood synergy team? So by having Venom in that spot, it allows you to potentially reapply the blind onto multiple team members on the opposition team if they have a slower character than Venom. So if there is a Groot, if there is a Drax, basically any type of character that runs slower, something like an Ultimus for example, then you can take your Venom, use his ultimate, and spread all those bleeds from Pyro, and split all those bleeds if you've got Sabretooth, and then re-blinding a team that's probably already shaken that blind off. It's a spectacularly good strategy, and it actually works surprisingly well against a Guardian squad. So it enables the Magneto squad to punch up quite well against a Brotherhood team. In Alliance War, it's all about whether or not that blind sticks turn 1 if they do have a boost up. But we're talking about Blitz at the moment, so that doesn't matter. So this team for me does not lose. I haven't encountered a team that can destroy me on this one. Now, this team right here, it doesn't lose. It really doesn't. And obviously, it probably wouldn't lose anyway because of Ultron. But you could split this team up into a few different variants. Like I could build a Guardians team quite comfortably. Sometimes I'll run that for fun. But the reason I chose to do it mainly this way was just basically getting a protective squad, finding a good home for Merc Lieutenant. And this team really, really punches things out very, very fast. So my Drax is a little bit underwhelming as well. That's one of the main reasons that I don't run Drax with this particular squad, but down the track I might break it up a little bit. Now, Merc LT is one of those characters that you can slot into so many different teams. You don't need him to be high level, you just need him to take a turn. He's going to give speed up, he's going to give offense up, and then everyone around him gets better because of it. So again, I think this team is overkill to have put my Ultron on, so I may not use him going forward. Now, Vision, I've been interchanging out of this squad a little bit recently. The reason for that is that obviously there is now the new Power Armor team. They perform quite well in Blitz. I'm keeping Vision here for now and not in the Power Armor team, where he is definitely much, much, much better. It's just that my Power Armor team has a massive CP difference between War Machine and my Falcon, and the Falcon and the Rescue are so squishy that they're not quite as sure to win yet, that they can pump up about a 50k, I guess, CP difference. So they can really, really hit up above themselves. Pun Fenders, enough said. This team does really, really well. As far as who you go up against, sometimes you do have to be a little bit careful. So if you're trying to punch up against a really high level defender squad in Blitz 8.3, sometimes that can not go your way. In fact, more often than not, it doesn't. It really depends on if you have any T4s on this squad. Who goes first quite often plays a part there. You usually want to use Daredevil's counter on the first term against a squad of defenders, mainly because he allows a counter, and then Punisher as well is going to jump in to destroy potentially a counter hit on their Punisher. I wouldn't go up against a shield with this team. Depending on the Brotherhood team, these guys can punch up against Brotherhood, but there is a little bit of RNG there in regards to whether or not you can pull that off. These guys are fantastic against all villains teams, against Kree squads as well, if you encounter any full Kree squads with Minerva, and some of the semi-villain hybrids. So if you do see that there is a Punisher, if you do see that there is a Thanos, and if you do see there is a Minerva, especially a squishy Minerva, having that Punisher around can be quite irritating. You can potentially really, really rip down those two targets that you need to drop quite quickly. So defenders are very, very reliable in Blitz, but again, you just have to be a little bit more cautious about who you choose to go up against. Now, this next team here, again, this is going to get broken up for me very, very soon. Normally, I would recommend the 5th person on this team to actually be Captain Marvel. I'm using her in a random squad at the moment, only because Captain Marvel can do so much work by herself that you don't necessarily need her in a kick-butt team like this Avengers hybrid. So I've got my Cap, Black Widow, Iron Man, War Machine, and then Quake. So this is basically a team designed all around speed up and slow down. So Black Widow speeds us up, Quake slows down the opposition team. That allows us to get ahead on turn management. And then we just basically wait until we can get the triple booms off. So we've got Iron Man's AoE, we've got War Machine's AoE, and then we have Quake's AoE. So those three combined, this team is probably sitting around a 90-ish% win ratio. There are some teams they really do poorly against. So Brotherhood is one team that this doesn't do very well against. That can be very easily fixed though, if you want to put a T4 ability on the Black Widow. So when you put a T4 ability on her special, that means that when she does her speed up and does her camouflage, she actually ends up removing a negative effect from all Avenger allies. Now on this team, it's only going to be Cap and Iron Man, so it's not really worth it in that squad. But if you were to shift this around a little bit, put a Vision in, maybe a Hawkeye, there's all sorts of variants of this squad that work very, very well. So again, I think Captain Marvel is one of the perfect additions to this team instead of the Quake. You don't necessarily need the speed up, speed down when she's punching a hole through something turn one. But at this stage, I'll show you that I've got her in a random team very, very soon. Now, Kree I love. Now, you want to talk about overkill? Having Minerva in this team at the moment is just out of pure laziness. So all of these characters have very, very similar CP. It's the reason that she's there and not Oracle. But Oracle could do just fine in this squad. So Kree with the right investment is an insanely good squad. The T4 ability on Noble's passive is really, really overlooked. It's probably my most underrated T4 ability in the game within a Kree squad, because she's got the ability to passively cleanse off 2 to 3 Kree and two negative debuffs on 3 different characters, which is huge for a free passive. They're bringing in Ronan, he uses his special, that takes off even more negative effects. So the Kree team can do surprisingly well against a wide variety of teams. You know, if you're coming up against not at 8.3, but at lower than tier 8, you can do a Guardian squad. I wouldn't recommend it, but it's very doable, mainly because of the defense up on the Kree Royal Guard. Brotherhood is hit or miss. I'd say it's a 50-50 whether you win that one. If you can make it to that second round and you haven't died to the bleed damage, you can remove all the debuffs that you have between Ronan and Kree Noble, and then you can use Minerva to heal that squad up. If only one character dies, you can resurrect that character using Minerva, and then you can get back on the Smash train. So this team does okay against most of the meta squads, but you really need to fear a Defender squad with Punisher. If you see a Punisher with this team, run away, because it is not going to work out well for you. Now, for most of you out there, I would not use the Minerva here. I would use the Minerva more in a Menardians hybrid. So I'd probably put that Minerva with your Rocket, your Star-Lord, a Groot, and then probably a Drax, maybe a Thanos. It really depends on what you've got at around that same CP level. So for me, this is overkill to have her on this team, but it does make this, with the right team selection, very, very high win rates for me. Okay, so I really dig the Kree team. They punch up quite a bit in Alliance War as well, because having all those boosts when you start up a match, or defense up when you start a match, it's amazing, giving this team time to get up and running, what they can actually do. Now, this squad here is not actually what I'm running at the moment. I run it a little bit differently. So at the moment, I have around a 28k Falcon. Now, what I do with that Falcon is I actually put it where I have the Quake here. So this is the first one of those squads where I basically have a bunch of Misfits all put together, because I didn't really have a home for all of them together at that particular stage. Now, this team, if you took out the Quake, has a relatively low win percentage. What this team really needs is speed. All right, if you can get speed on this team, if you can get that Goblin, and admittedly, not everyone's going to have a T12 Green Goblin, so I wouldn't recommend using him otherwise. You can really, really wreck some things on the opposition team. So I've got my, as I said, undergeared Drax. I need to show him some love. I put the Trooper next to him because it means I'm guaranteed to get off a few counter punches. Those 4 red stars on him means that's going to hit pretty hard. Sabretooth is going to bleed across the park. Now, by having Falcon on that far left instead of Quake, and this is the change that I made recently, especially if the other team has any buffs, it enables this team to just go bananas. All right, it gets them the speed that they need, the turn meter that they need to start really getting up and running. Win percentage wise, I'd say it's around 3 out of 4. It's far from perfect. It's not a team that I encourage you to build, but if you have some leftovers that kind of look like this, having a tank, some heavy DPS and some sustain, someone to speed that team up usually helps, or someone on your team to slow down the opposition. So Quake worked on this team because of the slowdown on them. Falcon works on this team because of the speed up on us. So this team does okay. I wouldn't recommend you copy and paste it again, but it works just fine for me. So you probably notice a theme without all of these characters is that you have either something that enables you to burst and blind and basically block the enemy team from doing something and then killing them over 2 or 3 turns with bleeds. Maybe you use turn meter manipulation with someone like Shield. So you have tanks, you have healers, you have buffs up. Down here with Juggernaut, we have buffs up, which protects the rest of this team. Down here, we have Vision, who basically helps get defense up on this team to help them get rolling. Ultron's going to buff the crap out of this team to help them get rolling. So does Merc Lieutenant. The defenders, we have heals, we have tanks, we have defense up. If we have a look on the next team down, we have defense up from Quake. So all of these teams have some sort of buff up mechanic, usually a defense up, or usually some sort of a tank that can get out early enough that it's going to absorb a lot of that damage. Teams that have that sort of turn meter manipulation, protection for your team in the early game with a defense up or offense down on the opposition really make successful Blitz teams. I mean, there's so many different combinations that you could do. I'm just showing you what I'm doing today. Now, this team here is the Blitz team that I used to use. Now, Black Panther, I have since moved down to the actual Wakandan team, and we'll talk about them in a sec. What I've done to replace him at the moment, and again, this is more of a necessity rather than something I would recommend, is I'm actually using Rescue in this squad. Now, her ultimate is kind of wasted on this team, but her ability to slow the other team down a little bit, so you've got some time to use the Gamora, you get your stuns and ability blocks off with Ant-Man and Wasp, so you start to slow down their train as well. And then obviously our Miss Marvel over there is going to absorb some of the hits. Having that barrier from Rescue just buys you a little bit of time so that you can get that ball rolling. So that team for me, I'd say it's very similar to the Kree. It's probably, to the team above. It's probably around let's say a 70% win rate would be what I experience with this. I have to be super careful about which teams I go up against with this. Anything that has a massive tank, like a Drax or a Luke Cage or a Juggernaut, I avoid those teams at all costs, because at the moment, Brawlers really struggle against anyone that has a defense up, and they also struggle against any tanks who are incredibly durable with incredibly high resistance, so you can't remove their taunt. And if you can't remove their taunt, the other team's just going to wean you down over time and you will lose. So that's one of the main downsides of a Brawler squad at this stage. With America Chavez coming to the game very shortly, who knows if that changes the dynamic? We'll have to wait and see. Next up is Wakanda. So Wakanda is a team that with no T4 investment is okay, but really can fall apart. By having some T4s into Shuri, especially her passive, getting that speed up to make this team get up and going, this team can be quite good. I have heard from a lot of players that have spent more time with them than myself that really investing T4 after T4 after T4 in this team really makes them hum. For me, they've got, I'd say, about a 90% win ratio. There's not too many teams I avoid. They can take on Shield if you're playing it smartly. They can struggle a little bit against Brotherhood. They can do quite well against Monadians, because obviously you're getting your full turn out before they take theirs. So you can usually remove the threat of a rocket. You can take out the Minerva straight away, the Star-Lord, whatever. Where this team really struggles is a little bit like the Minerva, is that if you don't get the kills of the DPS off early and you get stuck behind a very large tank, that you have to wait until your Okoye can buff strip the taunt away, and then you can get back to work. So Wakanda, Definitely a better raid team than a Blitz team, but they perform very, very reliably. You just have to be slightly selective about your opponents. So Brotherhood can give them some grief. Ultron teams can give them a little bit of grief as well. Now here's another random squad where I plugged a few characters together, and this team's job is to basically protect Captain Marvel. All we need her to do is her job. That's why she's got a big CP lead on everyone else here. So we're going to have Mantis. I can either use her stun or her heals on the first turn to slow down the opposition, or to get a recovery if they got an early shot off, if I was up against something like a Shield or a Wakanda, which I probably would normally avoid with this team. I've got my ability blocks in the sense of Korath. I can slow down the opposition team with this Storm. I've got Groot who can slow the opposition team. I've got defense up. I've got debuff clears. This team is quite built to get Captain Marvel to do her thing. Now, at 5 red stars, she is carrying this team. So this team is not going to work for a lot of people. There are better versions of this team, but this is a plug and play, and it revolves very much on high burst, ability block, and then sustaining my Captain Marvel long enough that she can do her job. I would say this team's batting at about 3 out of 4, so around 75% win-loss, and I have to be super careful about who I go up against. So they do quite well against defenders. I wouldn't take them against Shield. When I take them against Brotherhood, they actually do okay, all right? They're probably around, I'd say, yeah, that 75% win ratio. There's a little bit of RNG because Captain Marvel can rip out her ultimate, turn 1, shed off the blind, and just punch a hole through Pyro. I do have a T4 invested in her ultimate. That obviously helps out a lot. So I really like that team. I don't recommend it to others. It's very specific, but there are different variants of that. Just a team of random healers and protectors and, debuffers and slowers to basically let Captain Marvel have enough time to do her job. You are going to go quite well with that. All right, so the next team, I have my villains Boom, and basically I have Spider-Man there to help out. Now, Spider-Man can work very well back up here in this Brawler squad. So instead of using this tech hybrid, using Ant-Man and Wasp, you could certainly use a Deadpool. You could certainly use a Spider-Man. He would make that much, much, much easier and remove, I guess, those concerns I had earlier in regards to a tank. The reason that I have him down here is to buy this team a little bit of time because they don't have a tank and because Kingpin's quite slow until he gets his ability off. Kingpin is a great utility character that you do not need to put gear and ability into him to make him a rock star. All right, you just need him to take his first turn. He's done his job. Doesn't matter if he dies after that. We're going to get a massive hole punch and heal block from our Winter Soldier turn 1. We're going to have Yondu on his second turn absolutely carve a team up thanks to Spidey's defense down on their team. And then we're going to have Crossbones go off. So this team can do quite well. It's not going to do well against Shield or Wakanda because they're going to have defense up for their first 2 turns, which can be a massive pain in the rear end for this team. They're also not going to do well against a Pun Fenders because that very first turn that Punisher is going to take, you die. I mean, he just does too much damage to villains, so this team is not great against defenders. In fact, if you avoid anyone with this team, it is in fact defenders. So other than that, they've probably got around a 60% win ratio. It just depends at 8.3 who I pit them up against. So they're not guaranteed to win, but they're certainly very, very usable. Now this next team here is just about sort of wearing the other team down a little bit, blocking them, having some opportunities to res. The positioning of this team I actually change when I'm playing the game. I normally put Deadpool next to Thanos. It just depends on what sort of team I'm up against. So Thanos, he's going to obviously give you some very high resistance taunt, meaning that you can absorb a heck of a lot of damage. Now you've got Scarlet Witch there, so that she has the capacity to, if Doctor Strange gets his Winds of Watum off, you can put a hell of a lot of debuffs on their team for a couple of turns, which works out really well. And then Deadpool and Cable together can carve those guys up. Now, there is a better version of this squad, which is a Mystic Controller team. So you put in a Mordo and a Loki in the place of the Deadpool and the Cable, and that team does incredibly well. Now, my Mordo and my Loki are under-leveled at the moment. They'll be bringing Mordo up for the Martial Artists event for Psylocke very soon. But this team does just fine. I'd say it's batting at about a 3 out of 4 success rate, or around 75%. This team here is a random throw together of leftovers. So these ones are built mainly around similar CP. What I'll probably do in the very near future is remove my Cyborg from here, put him up into the Kree team you saw earlier, and then use a Reaper here. This team's very much about single target burst currently, okay? So anything that has defense up, generally I avoid it. So this is a great climbing team as you're on your way up to 8.3, but it's about a 50-50 win ratio. You should avoid pretty much all meta teams with this squad. You should use one of the other teams above because these guys are not going to be able to cut it at that particular point. Now this team down here, the Hand Mordo hybrid, or you almost want to call them the martial arts team these days, they do okay. I mean, they're not spectacular. They're relatively low level, but the combination of having Sentry putting evade on your team, and then by having your Mordo blinding the other team, they have a reasonable amount of survival. And the reason this team can do quite well is all about the Hand Archer. It's because he has a very, very high focus ability on his special, so he can strip off almost all buffs, or one buff, off anyone. And that's really important when you come up against tanky teams. It's a slow team, it's a grindy team, but it works quite well for me. So I would say this team has about a 60% win-loss ratio. Definitely don't take them up against a Pun Fenders team. Definitely don't take them up against a Shield. Low-level Brotherhoods, you can occasionally get a win with this team. It really depends on the RNG, obviously, and being able to hide some of those guys away from that Pyro early. Now, this is a Blitz team that I'm going to be using a lot more when I get it leveled up. You've already seen this magic in some of the other content creators' videos, but it is the Power Armor team. So this team is incredible. They can punch up against just about everything, except for Ultron. He throws some spanners in the works, just because he's got this defense up and the turn cycling that he takes. If you don't kill him on before his first turn, which you can't because he's going to res anyway, you are probably going to lose someone on this team. Depending on who dies in this team, really depends on if you die with this team. So if Ultron dies early, you're fine, but that's almost impossible to pull off. What you really need on that first turn is if you can get your vision to ability block their Ultron, then you've got a chance. That's pretty much the only way this team wins versus an Ultron, but it's far from reliable. I haven't been able to test it incredibly effectively against Ultrons as yet, because A, they don't show up in Blitz very often, and B, when they do, they're usually 250 to 300k teams. So they're almost impossible to take against these guys, and this particular matchup, they wouldn't come up against something that high anyway. So they're the teams that I use in Blitz. So I can use this squad to get top 100 for a new character. So I can score between 12 and 14 mil if I'm really, really pushing. Now, what I basically do is I have 4 random trash teams that I use for the first 2 climbs. All right, so I'll show you those teams in a minute. So if we go into here, that's one of them there, obviously. We scroll all the way down to the bottom. There's a couple of characters that I still have pretty much at like level 1, level 3, absolutely nothing put into them. So the very first time I play through Blitz, I'll use 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're a terrible group of characters, but they get you a tier 1, level 1 win, okay? Then I'll use the next 5 up, all because they've got relatively CP, similar CP. So this one, this one, this one, and this one. So in pretty much a AIM Hydra team with just Hand Assassin thrown on the top. So that team wins quite okay on the first run through, normally does okay on my second rotation as well, when I'm sitting around that tier 5 in the Blitz, okay? Next we run Scientist, Grenadier, Soldier, Rifle Trooper, and Mercenary Sniper. I've had a lot of guys in our alliance asking me to level this sniper just for a surprise in Alliance War, but I don't have the gold and the gear for that, guys, so maybe back down. So this team wins just fine in the first 2 rotations, but it's not worth using after that. And the final one I use in my climbing squads is Blade Master, Nebula, Spider-Man Miles, Hulk, and Thor. So those 5 guys basically punch a hole through, and then that allows me to go into my normal rotation. So then I literally run up from the bottom upwards, okay? You want to take your higher CP teams, you want to run them last. The reason you want to do that is that the higher the tier that you are, obviously the more points that you earn per Blitz run. So running those later gets you a benefit. So at the moment, I'm running 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14 teams every rotation. So because those blitzes with the new characters normally fall on a weekend for me, it works out quite well because I can just sit there and play through every 2 hours. Now, I'm not one of those people that sets an alarm and interrupts my sleep. I need every minute of my 6 to 7 hours or I'm a complete train wreck. So I know some of the higher end players do that. Please don't. I mean, your health comes much more importantly. I know taking health advice from this fat mess is not exactly what you're going to listen to, but your sleep is more important than this game, guys. Like, it's a fun game, but you know, your long-term health is much more important. So don't interrupt your sleep schedule for it. Now, whether or not I go for a top 1500 or a top 100 really depends on the third day. So, I mean, if it's a meetings day where I've got 15 minutes in between meetings, I can hit top 100, all right? No problems. Normally in about the 80s, 90s, I can't really punch up in the top 50 for new character blitzes. It's just too hard without spending. I don't really like spending on blitz currency. I've done it a couple of times, but it's just, you've got much better value for money if you are a spender putting that elsewhere. So unfortunately for those of you looking for a magic bullet for blitz, other than building the right teams, the rest of it is pretty much just about time and then obviously your roster. So, you know, you need to be able to get on every 2 hours or you're not going to place top 100. You need to be able to, you know, smash out 14 team rotations to be able to get in top 100 in a relatively high CP account. So I think I crossed 3 million CP a couple of days ago, which is nuts. So it's not achievable for everyone. I hope that me showing you my teams has given you a little bit of assistance. Feel free to submit any questions below or head on over to the Strikeforce Masters of Launch Discord. If you want additional help and you want us to go through your whole roster, we do have a Patreon set up on our Strikeforce Masters of Launch, which is www.patreon.com/SFMOL. If you liked me specifically today, there is also a donation link below in the comments. But your love and you being here watching is all I really need, guys. So again, make sure you keep an eye out for the Alternerd Reality website, which is going to launch at the end of May. Download the Strikeforce Masters of Launch podcast, available every single Tuesday. The episode this week, we went through the great news that we're going to get the Fastball special coming out for Colossus, which means a bit of a rework for Wolverine, my favorite character. I'm hoping that he's going to upgrade to some sort of usable status. So make sure you hit the like, make sure you hit the subscribe, make sure you come back and watch us again. But until next time, cheers.